Thanks for staying on the news feed, Newsroom Africa, channel 405, where we continue to talk about the life and times of the late former President Nelson Mandela. Now, books, theatrical works, movies and videos everywhere continue to honor the memory of Nelson Mandela. But here at home, we have our own authors and playwrights to craft works that we can cherish for generations to generations. Now, joining me to discuss how the democratic South Africa is shaping up to build a collective memory of its founding father are author and poet Mandla, Langa, and playwright Mbongeni, Ngema. It's good to have both of you on the news feed.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Now, July 18 marks, of course, a very important day in South Africa. Mandela Day all over the country. South Africans doing their bit, devoting at least 67 minutes to doing charitable work in memory of Madiba. Now, Bablanga, at some point you have, of course, worked on a book that is really dedicated to looking at the former president's life while he was, of course, the president of the country. It's a book that is called Dare Not Linger, the presidential years. Dare Not Linger. Now, this is the story, of course, that you have put together using bits and pieces. I think 70,000 words from a manuscript, including some archive material, conversations with friends, conversations with family, conversations with those who worked with him quite closely. And then you go on to describe him as the most unconfused man that you've ever met, that ever lived, so to speak. What makes you say that?
I think that if you look at what is happening in the world today, there's a lot of confusion. There are lots of leaders, some of them sitting in very, very important thrones who cannot by any stretch of the imagination be called leaders because of the kind of leadership that they give. Now, Madiba was the quintessential leader, very admired, not only by South Africans, but by, the international community. That's why this day today is celebrated not only in South Africa, but all over the world, and was declared by the United Nations to be the day to celebrate the life of Nelson Mandela. So for us as South Africans, I think we lost an incredibly important treasury, and it will take us some time before we find someone like him. That's why there's a song which says, Madiba, Mandela, there's no other one like him.
Yeah.
It's true.
We are suffering what you are calling in this generation this phenomenon of erasure, where we are beginning to hear all sorts of things, especially on Mandela Day when we commemorate this day. A lot of people describing him as a timid leader who opted for reconciliation instead of economic emancipation of the people of South Africa. And you're saying this is not just a phenomenon that you're seeing amongst the white people of this country, but even some black people in this country are beginning to do that. What's the danger of this trend?
Well, one of the biggest dangers in any society is the danger of not understanding, of not learning, of not looking at history. Someone once said that when people forget their history, they perish. And I think that as South Africans, we've got to watch that very carefully. The erasure you talk about is very, very fashionable in some corners, in some sectors, but it comes from a people's disaffection with the kind of leadership that they've been having possibly for the past 10 years, where there has been a trampling on all the values that Nelson Mandela espoused. And I think that people always look for somebody they can blame, and they don't want to blame the incumbents or the architects of all that wrong that happened, that was visited on the country. So it's that, and it's also ignorance. I think we really need to teach history to the point of it being painful. That's why I'm happy that history is now going to be made compulsory on the curriculums. Yeah. Because it's only when people start understanding what it is that they've lost in the leadership of, with the going away of people like Nelson Mandela, that they will realize that they had a whole incredibly beautiful, informative, and I think successful leadership in this country.
Now, Mandla, for years now, you've been toiling with this idea of getting some kind of vision yourself on how you can put this together in a musical. Last year, you announced that I finally got it. Now I know what I'm going to do, and it's going to happen this year, 2019. What actually happened? What clicked? That said to you, okay, this is the right moment and this is the time to put this body of work together.
It's a culmination of a lot of factors. A lot of people have talked about Nelson Mandela. A lot has been written about. A lot. There's been movies and television series about Mandela. And I finally felt that I have to tell from the eye of an artist the story of Madiba as I know him. Fortunately, because I have been very close to that family for many, many, many years, for decades, I understand the history around the family while Madiba was still in prison, when we were fighting for free Mandela during the days of the community of 10 in Soweto, way back when Dr. Ntato Motlana and those people were still around, up to the day when we actually saw him walking out of prison. And my greatest inspiration was in 2008 in London at Hyde Park, when he was handing over the baton to the young ones, after he said, we defeated apartheid, but we've got more challenges in the world. HIV and AIDS, we've got wars all over, people that are warmongers, raging wars. And he said, it is now in your hands. And I've written a song which is the last scene of my musical, Nelson Mandela, which says, it is now in your hands.
Looking at the Rivonia trial, the kind of bravery that was displayed at that Rivonia trial, kind of statements that were made, looking at the life in Robben Island, and of course talking about the release coming out, and the time that he spent now being a free man. It must be really difficult for you to cast talent of who's going to play that role. How is that process going?
It is a tough task. In fact, I've been thinking of a lot of actors that I know that are in the industry, and I'm saying, like, who can play Mandela? And I don't see one. Maybe someone new that no one of us have seen before can play the role, because it must have that depth. It must have that humility that Madiba had. As Mandla says, you know, he was a different kind of a leader. We all know him as up there as the icon, as the greatest statesman. But let me tell you, when you would sit with that man, he was the humblest person you could ever come across. Like your father from next door in the township. He'd say, I hear there are these problems, but tell me, because I don't know. What is the real issue? He would bring himself down to that level. And that's what I want the world to understand about him.
Yeah. And that's it right there, isn't it? One of the chapters in the book speak about his relationship with the judiciary. And especially with the Constitution. And I think that is a really important chapter, looking at the relationship that is currently going on between head of state and the judiciary. Just relate a little bit. I mean, when he, of course, had made a decision that there will be a commission around the workings of the rugby union, right? And Louis Late challenged that, took him to court. He decided he is actually going to subject himself to that process. And from the little writing that you have, why did he make that decision?
He wanted everyone in South Africa to submit themselves to the diktat of the judiciary. He wanted to show that respect. And so he refused even to sit down, you know, he was over 70 at the time, but he did stand throughout the whole proceedings to show deference, to show respect. He was giving us an example. But I also want that to resonate with what he did. The fact that even in 1952, when he started that whole defiance campaign, you must remember 52 is 4 years after the establishment of the National Party, when the danger, the police were at their most vicious, but he chooses to be the volunteer in chief. So he led by leading, he led by example, even with the judiciary. Right now, we would not be having a respected judiciary were it not for the examples that Mandela set.
I mean, even, in fact, the first leg of it at the High Court, he actually lost. And even in loss, he took that quite gracefully and said, look, the judge that we were faced is conservative. I was told, in fact, I got legal advice that you're likely going to lose this because this judge is just interested in humiliating a black leader. He went nonetheless. But he said, even then, we can still challenge that outcome and we can take it to the Constitution.
I think it's what they call leading by submission. It's leading by example. It's leading by making sure that people understand why we do need to have laws in the country.
Ngema, Langa, stay with me because after the break, I want us to unpack a little bit, a couple of other things. I mean, when we look at the issues of race, what his thoughts were and what is happening in the country right now. But if he was at the helm of his party right now, his organization, and I'm sure, Langa, I know you love that organization yourself, you grew up in that organization, how would he be handling the contradictions that are going on right now? Stay with us. You're on the news feed. It's Newsroom Africa, channel 405. We're back in a moment with this awesome guests as we continue to unpack particularly the type of leadership that is exhibited by the late Nelson Mandela. Thanks for staying on. Let's have a look at what's leading this hour. Relief for South Africans as the Reserve Bank cuts the repo rate by 25 basis points. This means the prime lending rate will also be lower at 10%. President Cyril Ramaphosa leads South Africans in remembering the legacy of former President Nelson Mandela with a visit to the Red Cross Children's Hospital in Cape Town. And Newsroom Africa is not left behind in joining in the Mandela Day celebrations with an act of kindness towards the less fortunate. And elsewhere across Mzansi, many honor Madiba by dedicating their time to make a difference. July 18th, a very important day in the calendar of what happens in the country where thousands, hundreds, millions, maybe even, I'm told 140 countries around the world observe this day and dedicating 67 minutes to doing charitable work. The Nelson Mandela Foundation saying, now that we know how to come together for a good cause, it's time that we take this a notch up and actually begin to make a real dent in poverty and inequality, starting at education level, talking about housing and talking about skilling those that need to be skilled. But right here in the studio, I've got fathers, I've got authors, I've got poets, I've got playwrights. They're talking to us about the legacy and the leadership of Nelson Mandela. And we're talking about, we're talking here to Mandla Langa as well as playwright Mbongeni Ngema. Let's come to you. I mean, you're saying it's time to take the folks in South Africa on a journey of the world's greatest statesman. Now, I know you spent a lot of time with Mamwin. In fact, you took her to all of your plays. You had fetched and she's seen a lot of your work. What is it? What is the essence of what you want to capture? And maybe where are you going to begin the journey?
Well, the journey with Madiba is going to start from the beginning. When he was not political, and how he was expelled from Fort Hare, into how he got into Johannesburg with his cousin, Justice, how he was introduced to an estate agent, Walter Sisulu, how he ended up in Alexander Township, and then the bus boycott, how that swinged his mind into joining the Youth League of the ANC, and then the rest is history. Then we see this vibrant Madiba, who is now, who has seen it all, and his eyes have been opened to the reality of the life of black South Africans, the killing in the minds of the strikers, right through to the Rivonia trial with Judge Quartus Devet, and Bram Fischer, the role he played, to the extent that the struggle that was fought in South Africa was not only fought by black people. Yeah. We must, as black South Africans, most importantly, understand that there were people like Bram Fischer, Joe Slovo, all other white people who were opposed to apartheid. Actually, you know, there is a scene in the play where Bram Fischer, which is the truth, where he says, they've captured all the documents at Lily's Leaf Farm. Yeah. I hope they do not pick up my handwriting.
Wow.
Wow. Because I may be joining you guys here.
Yes, yes.
You know, so it's very interesting drama that takes place there.
And of course, he had a pseudonym, right? That Lily's Leaf Farm. Was he playing the role of a guard there? Or?
Yes,
yes.
Yes.
Now, in the earlier instances, while he was governing, and I'll get a view from both of you on this, he addressed Parliament on the violence that was taking on in KwaZulu-Natal. And I'm pulling some of the specific lines here of what he says. He says, the perception that whites in this country do not care for black lives is there. I may not share it, but it is there. Do you think he really meant that? He shared that sentiment?
I think he did. That's a general statement. You see, in a situation of violence, it is difficult to pinpoint and say that section of the community is doing this and that. Because the killings in KwaZulu-Natal that were happening at the time, were, we all know that they were perpetrated by the apartheid government. Yeah. And the arms were sent into Inkatha, to KwaZulu-Natal, to ignite the black-on-black violence. So I think, in my own perception, I think that's what he was speaking to.
So at the time, in the heat of the moment, in the moment of that violence, a priority to him was to quell the violence more than to polarize and have one side up against another.
Absolutely. I mean, from the time when he was in prison, we must remember the kind of readings he did he read about the difficult transitions in India, for instance, in 1947, when millions of people were bound, were caught up in some internecine, factional violence. So he was aware of the effects of violence on any emergent, how to say, this country. And so he wanted to make sure that this does not happen in South Africa, which is why he was able to sit down and treat with the generals who had committed heinous crimes to make sure that this kind of specter, this horror, this does not get visited on the people of South Africa.
Yeah, I know you've been asked this before. I don't know if it's a fair question and how you view it. What do you think his view would be on state capture and how it's going on?
I think one of the things we must also remember is that Mandela was not only a creature of law, a respecter of law, but he was also a person that consulted quite strongly with some of the stalwarts of his movement. For instance, even in prison, he was in touch with O.R. Tambo. He was in touch with, of course, Walter Sisulu. Those were his go-to people. I would think that he would have looked at what is happening in South Africa today and would have called and would have corralled some of the saner heads that still exist in our country and found a solution through ensuing that people got together and discussed. And right now, unfortunately, we do not have what we can call a real states person, that an elderly person that people can look up to, that they can go to and say, here, the house is burning, please come and help us. But in those years when Mandela was still walking on this earth, these were the people he would have gone to and said, let us try and see a way of dealing with this. And of course, I would have thought that he would have gotten into a conclave with the National Executive Committee of the ANC when the National Executive Committee of the ANC was still strong, was still something that had an authoritative voice. And Mandela himself was an authoritative leader, although not an authoritarian leader.
Yes. Do you think he prioritized reconciliation over addressing the issues of the economy? And one could even ask, what type of leader is he, and how dare he believes that he can single-handedly have the whole country just focus on that and maybe even continue on that? Or is it not an expectation that we would continue on that? I suppose in the moment of the transition, that is what was important. But he does, I suppose, expect the country further on to engage in other struggles.
I think that because of the state of the country at the time, reconciliation was a priority. Because take away reconciliation, if it didn't happen, what would have happened to South Africa? Maybe we would have been in a state of what Zimbabwe is today. Not talking bad about Zimbabwe, but I'm just saying the economy would have crumbled completely. So I think he took an elderly view, as Mandla Langa here is saying. Okay, as an elderly person, let me fix the house. Let these people reconcile, let them get together. It's not going to end with me. When I'm no more there, they will then have to sort out the other issues that remain. And what we now are dealing with, economic emancipation of the African race, yes, he could not have done everything. But at least he sought the house. He put the house in order.
You share that same sentiment?
Absolutely. He built this house, which we call the New South Africa. Now, a father can build a house. He can make sure that the son and daughter do get married, but he's not, and he would pay even the lobola. but he would not be responsible for the consummation of that marriage.
Yes.
You see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, it's the 26th, it's the 27th, I believe, as well, when you will be holding auditions?
Yes.
25th and 26th? In fact, from the 23rd?
From the 23rd to the 26th at Uncle Tom's Hall, 23rd, 24th, and then 25th, 26th in Newtown at Moving Into Dance.
Yeah.
Specifically for the lead characters, Mandela, Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Kathrada, Bram Fisher, Judge Tivet, and those. And then later in September, I will then do the auditions for the rest of the cast. Of course, Winnie Mandela, who's very critical.
And what are you looking for? I mean, when somebody prepares, how do they prepare for this?
Well, I just asked them to bring a monologue from the work they've done before so that they're comfortable, and bring me 2 songs that they can sing. Because it's a musical, so it's song and dance.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Well, let me thank you both for coming through. I do appreciate you giving us your time and sharing these stories with us.
Thank you.
That's Mbongeni Ngema, as well as Mandla Langa there, taking us a little bit into the kind of thinking and the kind of leadership of the statesman, the greatest statesman that ever walked the face of this earth. That's the man we're talking about today, the late Nelson Mandela.